All right. Well, hey, everyone. I am here with Noemi, and we set up a time when we would just be able to come and chat and talk and just be able to I don't know, just honor each other in our journeys and in our stories. And if any of you saw the Hillsong documentary with the megachurch exposed, you will see that there were some parts of her story that were shared. And I just know that this is a soul who has experienced levels of healing, has been through things, but there's a real compassion to you, Noemi. And I just am really thankful that you're here, that you've taken the time to do this. So
Yeah,
why don't
thank
you
you for
just talk
having
a
me.
bit of just a little bit about yourself and just some of your background for us.
Sure. So just a big overview. I was born into a Latinx Pentecostal church in Arizona. My parents are from Mexico, so my grandpa had been a part of it, had converted from his indigenous spirituality over to Pentecostalism. My dad was born into it, and then I was born into it. So that's kind of what I came into. My mom had grown up Catholic, converted to Pentecostalism. So there's a bit of tension there with my mom's side of the family at the time. Now it's all better, but anyway, so that was like the big background of like religion. I ended up leaving my parents' church in junior year of college because I was questioning a lot of my belief. I was taking religion classes, studying fundamentalism within Christianity, and just realizing that a lot of the things were like really within it. And so I didn't feel comfortable anymore staying in a place where I didn't have the same belief system.
Yes.
It just didn't make sense. So I ended up leaving. It was a pretty traumatic experience seeing that, just because the ways that the pastor who I ended up telling that I wanted to leave was my dad's mentor. And by this time, my dad had already passed, and I had moved back to the US. So he was just like not happy about it at all, and was yelling, saying I was going to hell, things like that. And so that for me was like a pretty big moment of realization, like the first step of realizing what does it look like for a pastor to either feel like they have ownership over people,
Yes.
or truly want to serve people.
Yes.
So that was like a big moment for me. I ended up leaving. The cat is right next to me, so you might hear me eating.
Okay.
I ended up leaving after all. By the end of that meeting, I said, I'm not here to ask you, I'm here to inform you. Stepped away, and I could say the rest is history, but it continued because I started going to what I would call a white church, which was more of an evangelical type church in the community in college. So that was like a big introduction for me to understanding what evangelicalism was. And once I moved to Boston for grad school was the moment where I was looking for a church, found Hillsong, and started attending. Hillsong was planting in Boston. So it was like at the start of it all. I was there when they were doing Wednesday nights. They weren't even doing Sundays. Like the first service that was in Boston,
Oh, yes.
I was there. So I was there from the start, and yeah, we can go more into it later, but that's kind of a big synopsis of like how I had grown up in church, understood about leadership, and just experience different things within the church in different like denominations. So yeah.
So how would you describe, you mentioned the word fundamentalism for people who maybe don't know, how would you describe fundamentalism? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's pretty big things that categorize, putting on my religious studies hat.
You're okay.
A Christian fundamentalism, because there's fundamentalism within Hinduism, within Judaism, within many other like religions, but specifically within Christianity, the big pointers that we often see are viewing the Bible as literal, like no metaphorical, all literal. So the earth being created in literally 7 days.
Yes.
There actually being a literal flood. So everything is like very much it happened to them. Nothing is metaphorical or studied in a different way. So that's one of the big things. From that, they also have within marriage, they view it as, instead of viewing it as equal, they view it as complementary. So the man and the woman complement each other.
Yes.
And then they each have their roles, and they're really big about roles. And they say, well, this is better for the woman. It's a very patriarchal complementarism. So that's another big thing. And then the third thing I would point out would be dispensationalism. So the idea that the end of the world is happening, there's going to be a rapture. There's like debates of when the rapture is going to happen, but this whole theology of end times that we've been seeing with like the Left Behind movies, those are big behind fundamentalism. That's kind of where it came from. And that's one of the biggest things within it. So fundamentalism started creeping itself into many different denominations. It's not just particularly within one, but you see it a lot now within evangelicalism a bit, Pentecostalism, and just many different types. So wherever you see these three main things, that's where often we can start categorizing or thinking about categorizing it as fundamentalist. There's debates within Pentecostalism. I would say they are, but yeah, we can debate it all day.
Sure, I know.
Whether or not it is, but yeah, those are the big things about Christian fundamentalism.
So within your upbringing, you were experiencing fundamentalism. Can I ask what that looked like within the house, with the upbringing within your home?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate that in my home it looked a bit different. My dad had grown up with only brothers in a home where the woman had to do everything. So my grandma was the one doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, and there was 8 boys and her husband, so 9 men. And so she had to be the one taking care of everyone. And it was very tiring for her to wash clothes. They didn't have like washing machines like we do now. She would wash by hand. And so that for her was a lot. It took a huge toll on her. My dad saw that, and he didn't like how my grandma would suffer through it. And so when he had my sisters and I and my brother, who's the oldest, he didn't want to have gender roles within the home. So if we had to clean the yard, everyone was cleaning the yard. And typically it's the boys cleaning the yard and the girls inside. But no, for him, it was like everyone's doing everything. My brother learned how to iron. He learned how to wash, how to wash dishes, how to cook. So everyone was doing everything. And I felt very fortunate within that. My dad also allowed us a lot to ask questions because he grew up as being born into the church. He grew up not being able to ask a lot of questions. It had to all be by faith, like this is what it is. And so he would allow us to ask a bit more. And so we would have debates around mainly science, because my sisters and I were really into science. So what does science look like? The fact that we were studying evolution and we actually agreed with it. And my dad trying to figure out ways to like turn us over to creationism, and we'd be like, I don't know about that. So yeah, there was huge debates around Big Bang Theory, things like that. So yeah, in the home, it was super like different in comparison to how it was as soon as we stepped out and went to church. So at church, we had to really step into our role of where we sat, and we only sit with girls at church, or I wasn't allowed to cut my hair. I had to wear, I wasn't allowed to wear anything strapless. So it had to be, or no, even no straps. It had to have a sleeve and a pretty moderate sleeve. I had to wear skirts, no pants were allowed. I could only wear shorts for pajamas or like pants for pajamas, but outside the home, I had to put a skirt on to go out. And so those are like the big things that, which those categories or those things go into the complementary within marriage. So we were being trained up to be that perfect wife of long hair, long skirt kind of thing, learning within the boundaries of the home where we were at as someone who was socialized as a woman. So those are like the big things that I would say within the home and outside of the home, how they were.
Did you ever think to yourself that this felt a little bit wrong? I mean, were you ever thinking that maybe it needed to be more open in the way of looking at roles, or were you just went with it because this was what you were raised with?
Yeah, part of me just went with it because that's all I knew. And I started as I was getting older, not feeling comfortable wearing the clothes that I had in my closet because they were all very femme. And I asked my mom one day, I remember asking her for pants. So I was like, I don't want to wear this like skirt. And so I asked her for pants and she brought me sweats.
Yes.
And I was like, that's not what I wanted. So I
Yeah,
started crying because I felt like I think that's the moment I realized like I didn't have autonomy over what I wanted to wear. And I was starting to feel gender dysphoria because I didn't want to wear this dress or this skirt, but I had to do it. So I kind of, when that happened, I just like disconnected and disassociated and just like, well, this is what I'm born into, so I kind of have to do it. Because I didn't have the freedom at the time to leave. I didn't know I could leave.
Right.
Like that's what life was like. So that's what I had to endure.
Yes. Now you used the term gender dysphoria. So can you just explain to the viewers I have what that means?
Yeah. So for me, or in general, gender dysphoria is often where the body that you're in doesn't align with the sex that you were assigned at birth. So often for folks, it would be if they internally felt that they were a man or a boy, and they were born into a woman's body. So socially, they would have to wear women's things, like a skirt. And so that would bring them dysphoria because internally they feel a different way. For me, as a non-binary person, I felt more comfortable in mask presenting clothing. So for me to wear femme clothing was very dysphoric because it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't me. Hi, Finny. Oh, and he's in.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, those are like the big things. It can look differently for non-binary people, the dysphoria, but trans people experience it a lot differently or a lot more intense in comparison, I would say, from my experience personally. Yeah.
So now with regards to sexuality, we know that this is definitely part of your story. So when did this all, and we will be getting to the Hillsong here in a moment, but I am just honing in a bit on your upbringing. When did that all start to come forward with your family? Like, what did that all look like?
So I was actually around like 4 or 5 when I knew I was different. I had a crush on my preschool teacher Kelly. And I was starting to like realize that at the time for a few years, probably like 1 or 2 years, it was just like a crush. Like it didn't have any, like a very healthy little thing as a kid. Once I got older, I was around 6, my brother got married and he was the only boy. So he brought home my sister-in-law. And I remember my mom telling my sister-in-law, "Oh, you're the best daughter-in-law ever." you're the best daughter-in-law like I'll ever have. And she said, well, I'm the only one you'll ever have. And so that for me, I heard that and it struck because I started questioning, wait, does that mean I can't marry or bring my mom another daughter-in-law? Does it only have to be him? And so that for me started a lot of questions. And then as I got a little bit older and was in Sunday school, and I started to learn that, it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
Right.
So things like that. And they would literally say that in class. So that was pretty eye-opening for me. And once I came to that realization that, okay, I'm not supposed to like girls, then I just repressed it until I got older, because I was like, I didn't know what it meant. And I was a kid. And so I just kind of pushed it aside and was like, okay, like this is what I'm told to do. And I'm a big rule follower kind of person. Like it's just easier for me. And so I was like, okay, I'll just close my mouth and just go with the flow. So when my friends would ask me, ooh, who do you have a crush on? I would just make up like, oh, that boy. Yeah, sure. But I didn't really, I was trying to assimilate into the straight lifestyle. Kind of thing.
I understand. I can relate to different portions of what you're saying. And it's definitely a process. It really is. And there is a lot of mask wearing and a lot of things that you're lying to yourself and you're lying to other people. And you're not wanting to be like that, but you also know that like you're kind of almost weighing, is it easier to be honest in certain situations and maybe suffer some certain consequences, or is it easier just to who gives a shit and just blow it out there and see what happens? And I would have to say that mine came later in life, just coming forward and being very just open and honest after years of repressing and pushing down myself. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I came forward many years later, but I knew from a very, very young age. Yeah. And my parents knew, because like, I didn't want to play with Barbies. And if I did, I didn't want Barbie to have a boyfriend. Like her best friends would come and sleep over. Or my dad would buy me Hot Wheels and he would tell me like, don't tell your mom. So I would get super excited with all these Hot Wheels in my drawer and I would play with them in my room alone. So my dad always wanted to have, they thought I was going to be a boy when my mom was pregnant. And so my dad stayed with that. And so he would take me to work with him, and he worked in construction, and I would be super excited in like a construction zone and helping him out, passing the tools, learning how they were used. But like little did my dad know that I was actually like, this was very affirming to me to be there and to have these Hot Wheels and to have these things. Like I didn't care who had what toy. Toys weren't gendered for me. Like things weren't gendered. It was just what it is and what I enjoyed. And so, yeah.
So we are going to fast forward a little bit, because there is an area I am definitely focusing on. But let's look at this Hillsong moment. I know that this got you, into that interview, and just it felt like to me that your faith was very genuine. Like you really had a genuine desire for faith, even though you grew up with it and you were around it a lot. Sometimes people can have, I've grown up with faith. And, it's just, I'm taking on my parents' thing and that's what I'm doing. But it felt like for you that, yes, you were learning things from your upbringing. But when I've watched different interviews with you and heard your heart and all these sorts of things, it felt like to me, no, this was a real touching of your heart, though, too, that you really wanted to understand God and to understand the Bible and understand these things. And so can you just share a little bit about the transition that you went into Hillsong? You did mention that you started attending white churches and, those, and I was just like, oh boy. And so talk a little bit, just about your Hillsong experience, if you can.
Yeah, I won't go too much into detail. If you want to hear more of the details, you can go hear my podcast, False Prophets Hillsong. But the big things I would say So yes, my faith at one point was that of my parents.
Yes.
In college, it did shift a lot. I was part of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship,
Okay.
and more specifically within the LaFit chapter, so the Latino Fellowship, which looked very, very differently from the general chapter. And so that for me was like a big moment of realizing that church wasn't just about sitting or going to church and sitting in a pew and hearing the message, that it was a lot more about familia, that it was about like the people in the room and how together you were walking on this journey. So that like really shifted my faith a lot. And like Jesus the advocate, Jesus the one feeding the poor, sitting with the quote unquote sinner, and like what did that look like? And so when I get to Hillsong, I come with this like very justice and human rights focused
Yes.
faith. And so I get there and I see that it's a lot of production, which for me, it was like new because I you know, you get excited with the lights and
Yeah.
the realization that church could be cool.
Yeah.
Into what we think is cool. And so I was like, okay, this is a different kind of thing. So like the service is different, but church, and they would always say we're a church of connect groups, not with connect groups. So everyone is made up of like, we're clusters and we come together on Sundays. And that's kind of how InterVarsity looked like, where we were all in our different small groups and come together. And so I was like, oh my God, it's similar. And there's diversity of people, not as much as I would hope for, but it was good, you know, better than the mono-ethnic I had grown up with the majority of people being Latinx and majority Latinx people being Mexican. Yes. So here it was like very different. And so it really got me excited. But the biggest things that I saw were the welcome home and you belong. And I think that was for me, not just for myself, like I got really excited about myself of like, oh, I can come here. A home is where like familia is, or like where everyone is welcome, and doesn't matter who you are, or what you identify with, or what your questions are, you're going to be welcome in, and we're going to have this like communion together, and we can sit around a table and eat together. We're sitting with the sinners. Yes. And so that for me, that's what I when I saw that, I was like, okay, like this is similar, and this is something that I want to live out, because that was my faith. Little did I know, as I started continuing, probably like a year into helping out, I was a service lead within the events team. Okay. Which meant we were in charge of ensuring that service was done the way that it should be, like the production was the highest quality it could be. And the purpose supposedly was so that people can experience Jesus in the best way possible. And so we were over a lot of the teams, and we would ensure that they were doing their thing, that if the service went over by 5 minutes, no, we got to be respectful of people's time, and we would call them out. And it was just like a people would see the events team coming or walking by, and it would just be like, oh, the bosses are here, whatever, or like the people who are going to tell us something, because we were in close connection with the pastors, and knowing what was going to happen every moment of the service. And so writing that out and giving it to the pastor, telling him, this is what you're going to say. Yes. So I was one of the service leads for that, ensuring that my team was doing well, pastoring my team. And so I was doing that, and I was leading a Spanish speaking connect group, where everyone in my group, I wanted to recreate a little bit of what that LaFit was like, and bringing people together. And so I did a Spanish speaking connect group, which then pushed for the Portuguese speaking connect group to start, and the translations on services. So I was having a lot of like influence in different areas and pushing for language access. to not have it be this white church, to be this multicultural
Exactly.
church.
Yes.
And so that was like pretty big for me. And I was really happy that I was able to like expand upon that. And it started more as I kept going a year in. I took a gender and sexuality class because I was in grad school.
Yes.
And I wanted to understand public health within this realm that I never knew anything about. And so when I get there, the first class, we had to say our gender identity and sexual orientation, and everyone had to present themselves and say that and be comfortable with it and know who is in the room. So everyone is like saying all these like, cisgender or non-binary or transgender, like all these things. And I'm like, what are these words? Like, I don't know very much. So it gets to me and I'm like, and I say the word, I was like, I'm heterosexual.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was like, and I don't know what the other word means. And then people looked at me and they're like, oh, you're cisgender. And I was like, okay, sure. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm here to learn. I don't know anything. And they're like, okay, moving on. And so I sat with that and I was like, that doesn't feel right for my identity. So like, I saw it as an opportunity to learn and be able to maybe start questioning that again of what I was questioning when I was younger. So it really opened that door to start all of that. But when I started like allowing myself to question my sexuality, I was then struck with but what about my faith? And what does that look like? So because at the start of Hillsong, when I started attending, the pastor said, and I hated that he said it, but he said it, he said, I don't have time to pastor everyone here because there's a lot of people. So you have to learn how to pastor yourself. And you have to come ready on Sundays when you volunteer to be like filled. So how are you filling your cup to overflow so that when you come on Sunday, you can serve people? And I was like, what the hell? Like, you're the pastor. Like, we're here to receive you. Like, you're the one leading us. And this is what you're telling me. Like, I don't want to take responsibility over you as your pastor. And as a pastor's kid, like, that was like, it struck me, but I was like, okay. So I ran with it and I started on Sundays, my morning devotional would be looking up queer theology and hearing from all these preachers and like all of these like documentaries and just podcasts. And I found people like Kevin Garcia and the Tiny Revolution. I found Queerology. I found all these other podcasts, Kathy Boldock and her book.
Yes.
And I was just like bombarded and I was like, oh my God, like I can have faith and my sexual orientation be different from the norm. And I was getting really excited and I would be so overjoyed in the mornings and then get to church and realize, wait, I don't know if I can do that here. And so I went and told my leader, I asked her one day, like, hey, like, I was like, I have a friend who is gay and I don't know where they can volunteer in church. And all she said was like, well, everyone is welcome and everyone belongs and we take it as a case by case basis. And I was like, okay. And so I started like probing more questions until I was like, okay, like, fine, this friend is me. I'm this friend. I'm like queer. Right. I don't know what this means for me. I'm in leadership positions. I'm doing all of this. And all she said was, well, I'm okay. I'm fine with it. Like, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother the other pastors. So I think you're okay for now. And I was like, wait, so if a new leader comes in, does that mean I have to like let them know and see if they're okay with it? And like this be a constant thing? And she was like, well, like I said, it's a case by case basis. And I was like, okay. And all she said was like, if you're planning on starting to date, that's where we have to have a bigger conversation. And I was like, well, I'm not interested in doing any of that right now. Like, I'm just like trying to realize it for myself, what it means.
Yes.
And she's like, see, I said you were okay. So I was like, okay. So I kind of like was weirded out by it.
Mhm.
And that started a loop of like questioning and like going into it.
Yes.
A few months in, into doing all of that, I come out to my family, and that did not go well. My mom was not happy about it.
Mhm.
My siblings were just like, no, that's not right. And I did it over the phone with my mom and over email with my sisters, because it was the safest thing I felt I could do.
Sure.
And it just started a lot of like mental health crisis of like, my church wasn't sure about where I fit in, and there was uncertainty in my future there in leadership.
Yes.
My family didn't accept me anymore for who I was. I was no longer part of their church, and now I was queer. Like, those are two big things.
Mhm.
And I didn't have many friends outside of school, and the one friend that I had was agnostic, and she like didn't care for church, so I didn't really go to her with these problems.
Right.
So I started having a mental health crisis because everyone around me was rejecting me, and so I didn't know where I fit in. And I didn't think that if all of this was happening, I felt it was best to rid myself of this world. And so that's the path I started to go on with suicide ideation and like a whole bunch of things. I ended up going to the psych hospital in July of 2019 while I was still at Hillsong. And that was like a big eye opener for me. That's when the moment I started like not realizing that something was wrong.
Yes.
Because none of the pastors, my leader went to go visit me, but it was always like I'm here because I have to be, not because I want to be kind of thing. And my pastors never went. No one ever showed up. No one ever sent a letter, sent flowers, nothing. They weren't pastoring. And I had grown up going with my dad to hospitals, going with my dad to homes and people's deathbeds.
Sure.
And to see that I wasn't getting that in return, to the people that I was entrusting to be my pastors, was very eye-opening. I was like, you're not doing church. You're not being like Jesus. There's a disconnect there of like the familia, like where is the familia? And so that started a huge questioning for me. And that Sunday I got out of the hospital, the week I got out, that Sunday I went to church, and they were expecting me to deliver in the same ways that I was before I went in. And I was like, you don't care about me as a person, you care about me as a volunteer and what I can give to you. And so that's the moments I started like asking a lot of big questions. I was very fortunate that I got to see what good pastoring looked like, because my friend from school, her aunt was a pastor, and she was gay, and she's this Black woman. And I ended up going, I was invited to go to her church one Sunday for Drag Gospel Sunday.
Oh.
And I go in and I was like, okay, cool. I was starting to like be more accepting of my identity on my own. Like, I would put a mask when I would go to church and like not say anything about it. So this was like, okay, this is different. I was learning about drag. And so I get there, and there's this amazing drag queen leading a choir in the front. And she was saying to call her the chocolate goddess. And leading everyone in songs that I knew because I had grown up with those hymns.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, okay, so this is what it looks like. I knew what the theology looked like, but I didn't know what it looked like in practice. And so that's where I was like, I was falling in love with it. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. But it was a different tradition from what I had grown up in. So I was still really uncomfortable. but I stayed in close connection with the pastor, and she told me to call her Aunt D. So that kind of stayed. So Aunt D was like the person I would go to when I had questions, and I would ask her about, what does it look like when someone is in a crisis? How do you approach that at your church?
So,
And
this is wonderful, because this is where, we're going. This is because I would say, and I've never been a pastor. Okay. I've not been a pastor, but I, was in ministry for a long time and worked alongside a lot of pastors. And a lot of pastors in general are not equipped in areas of counseling. They're just not. A lot of them are not equipped, especially with mental health. I found in my own journey, the minute mental health is brought up, the same applications, the same methodology to healing all of that is brought across the desks to you, and you're kind of thinking, but that isn't working for me. What you're giving me is not working for me. And so I know that you eventually transitioned out of Hillsong. You left there eventually. So I guess we're gonna kind of start spinning it here. Talk a little bit, if you can, about that healing process and what well, first, let's hone in on your healing process first. Talk to me a little bit about what's that looked like for you, because you're very grounded. I've talked to many people, and there's a grounding to you. There's a solidity to you. There is obviously within you as well. You went on a journey to find this out for yourself, because no one was helping you navigate it. And so as well, there will be a lot of people that will say, well, she went and found all this other information and read all this stuff, and, she just is brainwashed by this. But what I see from it was you took the things that worked for you in those things and then discarded other things. You were very balanced in your approach. So you can just talk a little bit about your healing. And again, I just also want to say again, your podcast, I will put the link for, so everybody can hear the full story.
Yeah, and it goes more into detail about who Aunt D is, and she's on it. But I think for me, the healing process started while I was there. I didn't know it was happening, but the moment I think it started more the moment I was on the train home one Sunday, because I would cry after every service. My body was just, something was not right within my body. I would get a crisis during service. It was just bad. I would go up and down, even after coming back from the psych hospital, and was on medication for my, they categorized me with depression and anxiety. It still wasn't going well. So that Sunday in December, I was on the train and I was just crying. And I told myself internally, like, something has got to give. Like, what am I going to do in order to be better and do better? Like, I want to work at it when it comes to my mental health. I don't want this to be my life. I want to be able to have joy and happiness, and be able to, like, just not have to cry one day, like, if it's an everyday thing. And so I started analyzing everything around my life. I had tried many things. I had tried, I tried a lot of things, and I was like, okay, how about if I'm crying every day after service, I don't go to church. And so I was like, I need to choose myself. And if this isn't going well, then I'm going to do that. So that was my first step in healing, choosing myself. And I didn't go the following Sunday. And I told my roommate, who was my friend, the same friend who had introduced me to her aunt, I was like, hey, I'm not going to go to church, but I need help, because I'm going to want to, like, fall back into it, watch service on my phone, something. So I need to be able to, like, disconnect from it for a bit. Like, that's okay. And it was the first time I allowed myself permission not to go to church at all. And so we went grocery shopping, we went for brunch, we did all these things that day. We watched movies, and it was a great weekend. And I noticed the whole week my mental health was so much better. So the weekend rolled around and I wasn't having a down, and I was like, I'm going to try this again. I had a
Yeah.
great week. And so
Yeah.
I tried it again and it went really well again. And so then I came to the realization, like, I don't need this. I don't need to be going to that church, and that's okay.
Mm.
Um, so that's like, I ended up officially leaving. Like a few weeks later, I went to one of the services and just told them, I'm leaving, I'm done. Like, I'm choosing me. Um, and that's
See,
where
I
I
think,
was.
and that's very powerful, honestly, for you to be able to go and say, I'm choosing me. Because what we
Mhm.
find and what you were experiencing was you were relinquishing all these parts of you.
Yeah,
You were
my whole life.
sacrificing you, okay,
Yeah.
on this altar. And it was just like there was this sense where you, in church you were replaceable, right? It didn't
Mhm.
matter whether you were there. It didn't matter your, how much you were giving or giving to, you were replaceable. And then came the idea of, wow, like I'm sacrificing myself. I'm miserable every time I leave
Mhm.
there. I feel like I want to die, or I don't want to
Yeah,
be anymore. And
literally,
so,
yes.
yeah, I'm relating, I'm understanding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's powerful. That's a powerful position for you to be able to say, I'm choosing me. And I think that that is one of the
Mhm.
biggest points for those who begin to deconstruct their faith. There's this almost like a visceral response that you can have in your body, like, oh my God, I'm choosing me. I'm supposed to be choosing God. I'm choosing. It's
Yeah.
like you have this, but once you take that step, once you do that one weekend and you go for
Yeah.
brunch and you go to the sea or you watch movies or and there's no guilt, and you begin, the whole body begins to relax, the muscles begin to relax in you. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
something's different.
Yeah. And I think within my faith, I started I started to really sit back and think about it, and came to the realization that if if I was if my creation was made good and I was made in the image of God, then there is divinity within me. And so
Yes.
in order to be more like God, I have to be more like me. And if I want to learn how to love others better,
Come
because
on.
God is love, I have to love me. And
Yes.
so I was like, if I'm not okay, then nothing that I produce, my fruit won't be okay.
That's right.
And what I'm giving other people, and my outward expression of my inward reality.
Yes.
Um, and so that's where the choosing me was very important. Um, and by choosing me, I continued therapy in an even more intense
Beautiful.
way. I upped my dose of in medication. I started doing a lot more meditation and deep breathing, sitting in silence, which is very difficult when you have suicide ideation.
Mhm.
Um, and just like taking in my surroundings and what was around me. Um, so those kinds of things are super, super helpful. And letting people know around me, hey, this is the support that I need right now. Like, I may not be able to give a lot, but I need your support. And they were, my tribe was there to support me. Um, so as I was starting to get better, I the righteous anger started to come in.
Oh, yes.
Um, and I was getting frustrated. Sorry. I
Okay.
was getting frustrated that I was realizing that if the church had been open about their beliefs when it came to LGBTQ people, none of that would have happened. None of what I went through would have happened. I would have known early on, like, this isn't a place for me, I can move on. So I ended up messaging the pastor from Boston. And I tell him all of that. I was like, it's insane that I've been gone. I served you for 2 years and served this church faithfully. And to get nothing in return, to like, no one talks to me anymore. Everyone pushed me out. This could have all been avoided.
Right.
And his response is like, um, he said, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to respond to any of your questions, any of your statements. All I can say is that we love you, and to give the church as much grace as you want in return. And I was
Wow.
like, so it's conditional.
Wow.
And so that's where I kind of stepped back even more and started like, this is not okay.
Yes.
And I started going on it on social media, and I found other people who were also like angry at what had happened. And we started connecting and saying, and it wasn't an anger of like getting back at them, but an anger
Right.
because we knew they could do better. We knew
Yes.
they had the tools to do a great church, and saying, hey, just stop hurting people. Be like Jesus. Serve the people who need serving, you know? And so that's why we were speaking out more than anything, because we knew they could do better and they weren't doing that. And so Do Better Church started this like Instagram page that connected a lot of us. They're not as active anymore, but they started sharing stories of people in different churches.
Right.
And so that's where I got connected with a lot of my friends from Hillsong, and people just outside of it. And we were just like together sitting. What does it mean to heal? What does it mean to move forward? What does it mean to have righteous anger and be okay with having that feeling?
Right.
Because it wasn't okay what happened. None of that should have happened.
Mhm.
And so, and we talked about what it meant to have pastors who were ill-equipped to support people in crisis mode or just in general, like pastoring. And what it looked like for pastors who did get the training that they needed. And just the comparison of like, I'm not going to go to a doctor that didn't go to medical school just because they say they're a doctor.
Right.
You
Right.
know, like I'm
Right.
going to go,
Sure.
like that's the same applies to a pastor. If they're caring for people, they need the training.
Right.
And so
Right.
what does it look like for, and I saw that with Aunt D and with Hillsong Boston, where they do have their college, but what kind of training are they actually receiving?
Mhm.
Is it to run a business, or is it to actually care for people? And so that for me was like pretty eye-opening. And that's where like my activation started of wanting to be an advocate for that area. I ended up tagging Carl Lenz and tagging the pastor from Josh and the pastor from Boston, Josh Kimes, in one of my posts. And I ended up receiving a lot of like trolls, and that's like my first big moment of realization and or of like receiving backlash. And I ended up having to admit myself again into the psych hospital, because I noticed myself going down again, from all of the trolls and everything that was happening. So to prevent anything from getting worse, I chose myself again and went in,
Yes.
got the care that I needed, recentered myself, and came out and was like, okay, I need to be more strategic if I'm going to be advocating, because I'm going to burn out quickly.
Yeah.
So I set up some boundaries around myself on how to approach things, and continued on the journey of healing, of choosing myself, of being faithful to my therapy and doing the homework
Mhm.
of what it looked like, and talking with people. I think the biggest therapy for myself was just letting it out and writing it out,
Yes. Yes.
and analyzing truly what happened and the types of abuse that happened,
Yes.
from the spiritual bypassing to the gaslighting to the manipulation,
Yes.
and naming that. And so once I started doing all of that, I started to see myself like be more grounded in what I knew had happened, and I didn't have any more questions about what had happened. And so then I could look to the future and say, what do I want my life to look like?
Yes.
And I don't want it to always be this fighting and this like advocacy. I want to have like a partner and love and happiness and like things that I love to do as a hobby. And so I started dating again. And as I would date, I would let people know, hey, this is my life, but I don't want it to be that 100%. But just FYI, if you Google me, this will come up. And it was great. And with my girlfriend now, the first thing, a few months into dating, she was like, hey, so you're not allowed to talk about Hillsong when we're together. Because I don't want this to be like she's like, you say very deep things or very like intense things. And I want this to just be about us and like not have to worry about that. And she's like, I don't want it to have to be deep all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that for me was new. And I was like, okay. So I challenged myself to like, what does it look like to be in a relationship with someone and not have to talk about the hard things all the time? Like, of course, hard conversations happen, but they don't have to be there all the time. We can have fun.
Right.
And so I moved that aside and said, great, let's go for a picnic. Let's just talk about us. Let's just talk about our work and things like
the
that.
Weather, even.
Yeah, the weather.
The weather. Like, I don't know. I'm big on having beer and pizza. So like having a beer and pizza and just shooting the breeze. I feel like those things are critical to your healing. One of the biggest things I can, say regarding healing is that when you can disconnect from the battle, when you can disconnect from the front lines and you can go and you can have fun and not think about it, there is such healing in that. In fact, there's even, I would even say, personal opinion again, but there's even a faster healing process that can happen for someone when you are allowing yourself to not be on the battlefield, giving yourself permission. Because I know, maybe when you come out of things, you come out of trauma, you come out of these things, you're like, oh, I just want to like, you almost go into this situation of like, I want to save everybody else over here from that now. And now you're just saving in a different way. And it's like being allowed, giving yourself permission to just
and so I
down and breathe.
I remembered a lot. So within the public health field, when you're studying, you learn so many difficult things of like what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that they teach us, like public health 101, you can't resolve everything. And you might not see the resolution to your advocacy in your lifetime. And so as I was going through this, I had to step back and really talk to myself and be like, hey, like, it's okay to not want to be doing this all the time and to take a break and to take a breather.
Yes.
You can't resolve it all.
No.
Your voice is important and your advocacy is important, but it might not happen in your lifetime. And that's okay. And so to be able to step back and do that and have that, my personal reminder within my field, it was like a big eye opener. And so I think that's been like the biggest things. And there's been different areas in my life where I've been able to sit back and do that. But most recently, I was a job and this was probably like a month ago. We just didn't align. I was like having a really hard time there.
We're still here. We're still here. Yeah.
Perfect. And I was just, it wasn't a good position for me. It wasn't a good job for me. And I ended up leaving mid-August, and I didn't have a job for a month and a half. And that for me was like a moment to really recenter myself and to really realize like what is important to me in a job, in my life, in the things that I want to surround myself with. And I realized that it was like areas of where I was valued as an employee, as a human being, where I had dignity and power for what I wanted to choose. That the work that was being done aligned with my values. And that I found a place where like I can exemplify my strengths rather than trying to work on my weaknesses. Like, it's important to do that, but I don't want that to be my main job. And so as I was searching, I found this amazing job at the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. And I've been there for a week, and it's been like life-changing. Like that month and a half that I didn't have anything. I was really able to recenter myself, really rest finally, because that's super important to healing. Really resting, sleeping, listening to my body and my intuition. And then finally being like, okay, I'm ready to go out in the world and be an adult again. And I had the privilege of being able to do that. I know a lot of people don't have that ability, but I was able to do it and in experience for myself. And a lot more now, just because I able to like recenter myself, rest, and really think about what mattered to me more than a paycheck.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, because what would you say are things that, and then we're going to look at church leaders specifically, that you feel that church leaders need and could do better for the LGBTQ plus community? Because I know so many, and myself included, who really get isolated. You could feel isolated, all of these things. What do you think should be taught to pastors?
I think the biggest thing is basic human sexuality.
Okay. Yeah.
Understanding the difference between sex and gender.
Yes.
Sexual orientation, like the basics of human anatomy. They often don't know what it means, like the difference between each word scientifically. And for them to step back and have that, I would have a lot of those conversations with them. I'd be like, okay, let's talk about human sexuality for a minute. And it's awkward, but like that's what they needed. I think basic ethics is a huge thing of what does it look like for people, even if you don't agree with the theology, which is fine, for you to have the basic ethics to know, okay, I have queer people within my church. What does it look like for them to also be included within the family, to be included within, not for tolerance, and you don't have to affirm, but just simple welcomeness, but be clear that you're only welcoming and not affirming.
Yes.
Because we need to know our line of where we could receive what we need. Like, but what does it look day-to-day life for a person who's queer within your church?
Right.
Like, if you're gonna have an event for single people,
oh no,
what does it look like to invite a queer person if you're only focusing on people who are attracted to the opposite sex?
Correct.
And not saying that you have to have like queer dating within your church or like, specific events for that, but maybe not center your events around dating if you have queer people, and the most likely you do and you just don't know it. And so just gendering a lot of your events is really awkward. And those are like the biggest things. I think another big one is basic, like, understanding that if you don't know how to do something, that's okay, and giving it to someone who's a professional in that field. That's more specifically when it comes to mental health.
Yes.
The biggest thing that I experienced with Aunt Dee is that she knew how to guide me into receiving the care that I needed. She wasn't my provider. She wasn't the person that I went to for care.
Right.
And she set that boundary early on. So how do pastors truly set that boundary? I saw my dad not set boundaries many times, and it would get really awkward, people calling him really early in the morning or like 2 a.m., So how do you set those boundaries as well as leaders with your congregation, and ensuring that they are guided to the services that they need, not you be the provider or the physician or the psychologist or whatever. You don't have qualifications in those fields. If you did go to school for that, great. But if you didn't, like, don't try to invent the wheel on that. Guide people to the services in your community.
Mhm.
And so I think like that's truly what I see a pastor doing, walking with people rather than giving them the medication. And so, yeah, like those are probably like the bigger things that I would say.
Okay.
I'm seeing that a lot now that I'm in BU School of Theology, studying my master's in theological studies,
Mhm.
mainly for academic purposes. Um, but I see a lot of people who are going to school to be pastors. And so they came to the school specifically because they wanted the diversity of thought and they wanted to truly learn how to care for people, what it meant to have pastoral care. Um, and we have a lot of those conversations. Like they've never interacted with a queer person and I'm their first interaction. And I'm like,
Right.
great, I'm here, I'm queer. I'm gonna tell you about my perspective on faith and how it's a very different from others, but you know, that's okay because you need to have that experience. And so, yeah, I think those are the big things that I would say.
And what would you say to queer people who want to be in the church or be in ministry, and they're either coming up against things, or where should, what do they do? What are some tools and things that you think you can give them to know so that they don't get into these situations where they're getting hurt or burnt?
Yeah. I think the first thing is asking the question, are you welcomed or are you affirmed? Um,
What's the difference?
So welcoming would be that like anybody can come into my house,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm gonna have rules for what that means. So being clear on what those rules and boundaries are. Affirmation is anybody can come into my house and you can be whoever you want. And you can come with whatever identities you have. In welcomeness, there's terms and conditions to what that looks like. And so what does it look like going into your church? Are you like allowed to go in, but you're not able to show all of who you are? Or are you able to come in and all of who you are is celebrated? Are you tolerated or are you celebrated? And I think those are the big things that I would say. There's very big questions when you're trying to discover that of what your church stands by. The biggest things that I did, and I learned this, how to ask those questions is basic asking of, would an openly queer person be hired to work here? Would an openly queer couple of the same sex be married at this church and celebrated in that marriage? Would they be able to be in leadership at this church if they're openly queer? And so there's a few more. I have all of those in my Instagram page of like asking your church. And if one of those is no, you're not being affirmed, you're not being celebrated. And this could apply to many different identities as a woman, or as women, or as like people with disabilities. If there's like one of those answers is no, then you're not being affirmed, you're not being celebrated, you're only being tolerated. And so those are the big things to discover. I think that's the first step in knowing if this place is for you or not. If it's not affirming, I would highly recommend you find somewhere that is. It may look like a different tradition from what you're used to, but there's beauty in all of it, and you'll find God in all of it.
Yes.
You'll find divine connection in all of where you go. And so I think, yeah, I think those are the biggest things. It's amazing to have affirmation. It's so different.
Yes.
I didn't realize it until I started school more
Mm-hmm.
and went to chapel one day. I wasn't able to go to church personally because of my trauma, and I started going to chapel at school, and to see how I can walk in presenting however I want, and I'm welcome with the biggest hug, and I'm given the liturgy book and I can sing with everyone. I may not believe the way they believe, but
Right.
I'm like, this is beautiful because I have community. And this coming Wednesday we have the Sacred Worth service, which is the LGBTQ club, is leading it. And so we're all super excited that we get to have a space within that. And so, yeah, I think those are the big things of realizing, are you welcomed, or are you affirmed? Are you tolerated? Are you accepted? Realizing the space that you're in, because if the space is not for you, it's okay to leave.
Right.
Yeah, like leaving is the most liberating thing, because you're choosing yourself over other people's needs. And yeah, like I said, true leadership and true, like, really realizing who you are in the image of God is to first love yourself so that you can love others. Yeah.
So can I ask you a closing question here?
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a child of God?
That's a big question.
I know it is. I knew it. I knew. And I thought, I'm just gonna, because somebody brought this to me, and I'm just curious how you happen to see it. What would you see it as?
Yeah. See, I have trouble with this word because this phrase was used for trauma purposes. Of they were trying to use conversion therapy by using this term of saying I had to identify as a child of God rather than queer. They were making it mutually exclusive, or they were making it one or the other. And so for me, I would say yes. But I would see it more as the idea of adoption rather than anything else. I think because when you have, and it doesn't matter, I think when you have a family, again, going back to that word of familia, you find unconditional love within that family unit. And so to have a divine being accept me for all of who I am and celebrate me, that for me tells me that I am part of the family, and that I am of whatever part of that family that I fall into, either child, aunt, cousin, but I'm a part of that family and I'm celebrated there. And so as someone who identifies as agnostic Christian kind of still, and I identify with those two because I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay not knowing. I'm okay in the unknown. But I'm also holding on to the beauty of social justice and human rights and advocacy that I found within the characteristics of Jesus, and within the characteristics of God as in divinity. And I'm still wrestling with a lot of questions even now in theology school. But yeah, I think those are the big things that, like, because there's so much beauty in that, I want to be a part of that family. And instead of me saying, does God accept me, is, do I accept this? Do I accept being a part of this? So it's the other way around. And so because I love the beauty of it, I would say, yeah, I accept being in that family.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted to hear, because I too went through some of those things with conversion therapy, and I am a child of God thing. And I just want to affirm you right here on here and just say that you're welcome in my family and you're welcome in the family, because I think what I wanted to see and just hear as you were sharing is that there's hope, that there is hope after going through religious trauma. There is hope. There are spaces and places that queer people can find that acceptance and that true unconditional love. Not we are unconditionally loving and have community on the sign that says we are community, but really we are we are communal. We are bringing people in and we are loving them. And there should be a loving unto health, not a loving unto death, where people are dying in it. And I believe that real love is healthy, and love is who you are. It resonates from you. There's a compassion in you. There's a kindness in you. And I just want to say thank you so much for just coming on here and just being open and just talking the way that you did. Are there anything that you'd like to say to anybody, or if we can even look and see if there are questions, because
Yeah, we can do that. We can
I
take
don't
a
know
look
if there
at
are
that.
any questions. I do not
If
see.
if there isn't, I'm happy to say a few last things.
You can say a few last things.
Okay.
I must have shut off the comments. So go.
I think as the country in the US, and I'm talking for where I'm located in the world, things are getting hard here to be a queer person. I'm very privileged to live in Massachusetts. So it's a state that's like a lot more welcoming and affirming than many. And so I saw this post yesterday, I think I posted in my story, where it said, I don't want straight kids to be queer. I want queer kids to survive. And so I think the biggest part of why I share my story and I speak out is because I want queer people to thrive and not just survive, but I want them to thrive. There's so many of us who don't have a place where they could safely be who they are. And by telling our stories, we're able to show that we're people just like everyone else. You just know a little bit more about us. It's basic human anatomy that there's animals that are attracted to ones of the same sex. That happens to within humans. And so if we're able to go down to the basic things of that, I just want queer kids, queer youth, queer people to thrive and to survive if need be, but also thrive. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Seriously, you're as you were talking, I just kind of pictured in my head like a life preserver, and you sometimes throw the life preserver out to people and you never know who's listening. You never know. The stories are vast. There's so many, and my hope is that pastors and churches will kind of reckon with themselves on some of the stances and the way that they're doing things. Some of these big mega churches, the Bethel churches, that and the other would come to a place of acknowledging where there has been hurt. Because I think like a lot of people start out in this not wanting to hurt people. I think, I mean, I became a missionary because I didn't want to hurt people, and that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. And I think what I want to see is I'd love to see the bridge built. And I believe if we do it in a manner and in a way that is honoring to them, but they in turn do a way to us that's honoring to us and who we are as well, that bridge and that peace and that reconciliation can happen. But until then, if there's just going to be this constant war, is what I'm seeing happen in the US. I'm in the UK, so it's a very different world over here in some ways. Some ways freer in areas with this. That's my hope. But I think you're a light. I think you're a voice. And it's just been a pleasure, Noemi, just sitting and chatting with you today. And I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Sure thing. All right, I'm going to shut off the recording here.